Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. If we look at today's The Hindu newspaper, there are very few newspaper articles which are relevant from your examination point of view. And same is the case with today's Indian Express as well. But yes, there are quite a few newspaper articles from the economy section that can be asked in your examination, but those we shall be covering in our weekly economy lectures. And to tell you, the third weekly economy lecture that covers last week's business-related newspaper articles, this video shall be uploaded on our YouTube channel by 10 p.m. tonight. So let's get started and analyze today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with the contents, what we are going to discuss today. We'll discuss two important newspaper articles on page number 1. And then we will elaborate and analyze 3 opinion columns written in today's The Hindu newspaper. And then we will also be looking at some of the prelims based questions and the mains based questions that can be asked in your examination. Page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu, quest for peace not at the cost of self-respect, says the Prime Minister. Now a significant statement has been made by the Prime Minister in his monthly Mann Ki Baat. But to understand this newspaper article, let's go into the context of it. External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj addressed the United Nations and castigated the policy of the government of Pakistan. Because it's the policy of the government of Pakistan to not only export terror, but also support terror. External Affairs Minister said, we want peace with Pakistan, we want to have talks with Pakistan, we want to engage in a dialogue with Pakistan, but talks and terror cannot go together. It is the glorification of the terrorists by Pakistan that has forced us to cancel the talks between India and Pakistan. When the turn of the Foreign Minister of Pakistan to address the United Nations Assembly came, he ironically attacked the government of India and accused the government of India of exporting terror to Pakistan. In fact, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan accused the government of India of planning and orchestrating a terrorist attack on a school bus in Peshawar, which killed more than 150 school children. So this is something preposterous on part of Pakistan to accuse India of carrying out terrorist activities in Pakistan. But nevertheless, in this context, Prime Minister addressed the nation in his monthly Mann Ki Baat and he made a very, very important and significant statement. And this statement reflects the policy shift vis-a-vis Pakistan by the government of India. What Prime Minister said, it has now been decided that our soldiers will give a befitting reply to whosoever makes an attempt to destroy the atmosphere of peace and progress in our nation. This is a big statement for our Prime Minister to make. That means now the policy of the government of India with respect to Pakistan is crystal clear. We will not take the terror emanating from Pakistan lightly. We will not take the terrorist activities on our soil lightly. We are going to retaliate. And the armed forces, it seems, have been given the power to choose the timing and the place of the attack if ever terrorist activities continue from the soil of Pakistan. That's a big statement to make, and this statement you can quote in your answers if the question related to Indo-Pakistan policy or internal security is asked in the examination. Now let's look at second important news on page number 1. Stubble burning, and this topic is relevant from your environment and ecology point of view. Very important newspaper article. Now paddy season is over in Punjab. Now paddy is harvested and what is left is the residue, and this residue is what we call stubble. That means the act of removing paddy crop residue from the field, you have to remove the crop residue from the field. Why you have to remove the stubble? Because you have to sow wheat, because the time for the next crop has now started. This is a problem in areas where combined harvesting is employed. Now, what is this combined harvesting? Very simply, combines are machines, and these combines are machines that harvest the separated grain. Combines are machines that harvest, that means separate the grain and also clean the separated grain all at once. But there is a problem when you use these combines. What is the problem? These combines don't cut close enough to the ground. When they do not cut close enough to the ground, that means the stubble is left over, the crop residue is still there. Now you have to use this land for the next crop, for sowing wheat as well. And farmer has got very less time to clean this land. So what is the quickest and the cheapest solution for a farmer? He burns the stubble. And when farmer burns the stubble, ultimately it causes environmental degradation, and some environmental experts say that it is responsible for causing smog in Delhi as well, environmental pollution in northern India as well. Is stubble burning the only solution? Is stubble burning the only solution so that you prepare your land for the next crop? No, that's not the only solution. There is an alternative called THS. What is this THS? Turbo Happy Seeder. This Turbo Happy Seeder is basically a machine that is mounted on a tractor. This Turbo Happy Seeder, it not only cuts and uproots the stubble, but also drills wheat seeds on the soil. So this is the alternative to the stubble burning. Now the question you might be asking is, why is it that the farmer does not employ this Turbo Happy Seeder and instead opts for stubble burning? This is slightly costlier. It costs 1.3 lakh rupees for a farmer. And in an atmosphere where the farmer is in distress, when agriculture is in distress, we can't be expecting a massive investment by the farmer to buy this Turbo Happy Seeder. This is where the government should incentivize the farmer to opt for this Turbo Happy Seeder, because ultimately the environment will be benefited. But there are others who say we cannot curb this crop burning stubble even with Turbo Happy Seeder. Why? Because unless and until we find the alternative usages of the stubble, we cannot curb the menace of stubble burning. So what is the use of stubble? Where can we use the stubble so that farmers, instead of burning the stubble down, can utilize it for their own monetary benefit? We can use the stubble for making beds for our livestock. We can use it for thatching. We can use this stubble to produce biomass. And ultimately through this biomass we can generate power. But there are other environmental activists who say even this alternative will not work. What is the best solution to curb this menace of stubble burning? That we should find alternatives to paddy crops. We should minimize the sowing of paddy. Paddy cultivation should be reduced. And how can we reduce paddy cultivation? We can incentivize farmers to grow other crops. And how can we incentivize farmers to grow other crops? There are experts who say that government should allow the production of ethanol from maize. When the government allows production of ethanol from maize, then many paddy farmers will have a reason to switch over to maize. These are the solutions to stubble farming or stubble burning and can be asked in your examination. Now let's look at some of the important editorials and columns in today's The Hindu newspaper. The first one is a very beautiful article written by Suhrit Parthasarthi that analyzes the recent verdict of the Supreme Court in the Sabre Malai case. Now let me try and make it simpler for you to understand this newspaper article so that you don't have to read it. The first thing or the first part of this editorial or this column is slightly technical. But I will make it slightly simpler for you, although it is not required from your examination point of view, but still I'm going to tell you. There was a time in India where only an aggrieved individual could file a case. That means if my fundamental right is violated, I can approach the court. If your fundamental right is violated, you can approach the court. But then in 1970s, two of the brightest judges of India, Justice P.N. Bhagwati and Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, they invented a doctrine which led to the system of PIL in this country, public interest litigation. Under this public interest litigation, whether you are an aggrieved individual or not, whether your fundamental rights are violated or not, even then you can approach the Supreme Court and High Court in this country. Because only Supreme Courts and High Courts can employ public interest litigation, can accept these PILs. The origin of this PIL is social action litigation in United States Supreme Court, wherein any public spirited individual can take up the cause of a group of people, a marginalized section of the society, and on their behalf file a case in the court. That's the case with India as well, PIL. I am filing a public interest litigation in the court. I may not be an aggrieved individual. My fundamental right may not have been violated, but a fundamental right of a group of citizens have been violated, and on their behalf I am filing a case in the Supreme Court. This case before the Supreme Court dealt with Indian Young Lawyers Association versus the state of Kerala. So here this case related to Sabarimala, this case was not filed by the devotees. This case was not filed by those who are the devotees of Lord Ayyappa. This case was filed by Indian Young Lawyers Association, whose fundamental rights were not violated. But even then, this petition was accepted by the Supreme Court and this public interest litigation was accepted. By a majority of 4:1, the Supreme Court in this landmark verdict said that this old age practice, where women in the age group of 10 to 50, where the menstruating women are denied entry into the inner sanctum sanctorum of the temple, this practice is unconstitutional. And then the Supreme Court ruled that all women may pray. Women of all ages may pray at the Sabarimala temple. But there was one woman judge who disagreed, and her name was Justice Indu Malhotra. She said that this petition should not have been accepted in the first place. That means this public interest litigation was not maintainable. Why it was not maintainable? Indu Malhotra writes that this petition was not filed by those individuals who were aggrieved. That means this petition was not filed by those women who are the devotees of Lord Ayyappa, who have been deprived by the temple authorities from getting entry into the inner sanctum sanctorum of the temple. Since it was not filed by the aggrieved individuals, this public interest litigation should have been rejected. It was not maintainable. But in an era of public interest litigation, how can such a petition be not entertained by the Supreme Court? But this is what Suhrit Parthasarthi talks about. He says that Justice Indu Malhotra has made a very important point. Although Suhrit Parthasarthi disagrees with Justice Indu Malhotra, but he says even then Justice Indu Malhotra has made one critical point, one significant point. Tomorrow in these religious matters, a non-religious person can file a case. An atheist can file a case. An agnostic can file a case. That means those who are not devotees, those who are not religious, those who are not followers of a particular religion, they may see some problem with that religion and file a case in the Supreme Court. In matters of religion, we have to understand that petitions should be maintainable. That means those who are the direct sufferers of these rules, they should be in a position to file the case, no one else. That means maybe what Justice Indu Malhotra is talking about, that in matters related to religion, only those who have been aggrieved, that means the followers of that particular religion, should be in a position to file a case. Someone else should not file a case. This is slightly technical, but can be relevant from your interview point of view if a question is asked. But the second part of this article is very, very exciting. And it talks about the essential religious practices doctrine that we have discussed day before yesterday in our Hindu newspaper analysis. And if you are new to this session, please go through that video lecture and you will understand what I'm talking about. What Surat Parthasarthi says, that instead of essential practices doctrine, what we should follow what Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud has advocated. Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud, the article says, is against this essential religious practices doctrine. Instead, what Justice Chandrachud is talking about, he is talking about a mechanism called anti-exclusion. That means instead of essential religious practices doctrine, we should use the doctrine of anti-exclusion. What is this anti-exclusion? We have a constitution. I'll make it as simple as possible. We have a constitution. This constitution has given the rights to a religious body under Article 26. And under Article 25, this constitution has given a fundamental right to individuals as well. But then can this religious body make some rules and exclude these individuals? If this religious body makes some rules and excludes these individuals, and this exclusion leads to a conflict with fundamental rights provided by this constitution, then on this very ground we should declare these rules unconstitutional. That means we should not get into whether this practice is essential to a religion or not. For example, this essential religious practice doctrine has been used by the Supreme Court with consistent inconsistency. Mark my words. This doctrine has been used by the Supreme Court in consistent inconsistency. How? Sometimes Supreme Court uses this essential religious doctrine to say how? Sometimes Supreme Court looks at a particular ritual and says that it is an essential religious practice because it was present in this religion when the religion was born. Sometimes essential religious doctrine is used by the Supreme Court vis-a-vis individuals. How individuals? For example, a case was filed by a young man from Kerala. He was not allowed to sport a beard because he was a Muslim. And he was dismissed from his service. He was dismissed. He was part of Indian Air Force. He was dismissed from the service because he was sporting a beard. Because as per the rules, you cannot sport a beard unless and until you are a Sikh. Because in Sikhism, beard is an essential religious practice. In Islam, it is not an essential religious practice. Now, how did Supreme Court came to this conclusion that beard is not an essential religious practice in Islam? Supreme Court cited that look at the prominent Muslim personalities in India. They don't sport the beard. So sometimes this essential religious practice, this doctrine has been looked at by the Supreme Court to check whether this practice is in operation since time immemorial or not. Or sometimes by looking at what the contemporary followers of that religion do to decide whether it's an essential practice or not. So this essential religious practice doctrine has been used by the Supreme Court with consistent inconsistency. So an alternative to this has been found by Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud, who talks about anti-exclusion doctrine. That means under this anti-exclusion doctrine, if a religious body makes some rules and don't go into this determination whether these rules are essential religious practice or not, we will not get into. Why? Because judges have to deal with the law. They don't have to deal with the religion. They can't be the certifiers of what is essential to a religion and what is not essential to a religion. That is what Justice Indu Malhotra also says. Justice Indu Malhotra says what is essential to a religion should be decided by that religious community itself. Judiciary should not decide that. Now Dhananjay Chandrachud says these rules we will not get into, or we should not get into whether these rules are essential part of the religion or not. But what we should look into, whether these rules exclude its individuals And if these rules exclude a certain section of the society, violating their fundamental rights given by the Constitution, then that rule shall be declared unconstitutional without going into whether that practice is essential to a religion, integral to a religion or not. That's the crux of this article written by Suhrit Parthasarthi, An Ongoing Quest for Equality. It's a beautiful article. Now let's look at in Parliament's court. This is also something that we debated in the past, where Supreme Court refused to disqualify those legislators against whom criminal charges are pending in the court of law. Instead, what Supreme Court called for a strong law by the Parliament to curb the criminalization of politics. Here there are some discrepancies, some errors in this article. For example, this article says that nota was introduced by the judiciary in the year 2003. It's wrong. It was introduced in the year 2013. And whatever this newspaper article talks about, we have discussed that in our previous lecture, in our previous discussion on the Supreme Court ruling. Please go through that. Beyond that, you don't have to read anything from this newspaper article. Now let's look at the last article that we have to discuss, the road to e-vehicles. Jharkhand Chief Minister announced recently that his government has introduced electric vehicles for official use. Now this is a big step to have been taken by Jharkhand. If we look at our government officials, they are tremendous users of fossil fuel. If you look at our politicians and ministers, they travel in cavalcades and they burn a lot of fossil fuels. If electric vehicles are used by these government officers and the ministers, then we are going to solve the problem of our fossil fuel usage to a large extent. Because if we look at the per capita and per kilometer consumption of fossil fuel, that is many times higher for these politicians than for ordinary users, because they travel in huge cavalcades. This editorial, written by G. Sampath, who is the social affairs editor at The Hindu, he says that other states as well as the center should follow this example set up by Jharkhand. And it will have two impacts or two beautiful spin-offs. Number one, it will encourage the spread of transportation infrastructure related to e-vehicles. Second, it will help in the early adoption of e-vehicles. That means if other states as well as the center follow the example of Jharkhand, then it will have two positive impacts. One, it will encourage the spread of transportation infrastructure, because then the infrastructure related to them will be quickly generated and created. And second, people will adopt e-vehicles earlier than normal, because we have a target. India's goal is to ensure that by 2030, all public transport should be electric. And 30% of the private vehicles in India should also be electric. In fact, Nitin Gadkari, Roads and Highways Minister, he made a speech few months back wherein he said, if you don't have a policy, he was addressing the car manufacturers, if you cannot early adopt the e-vehicle technology, then you will be discarded. So it was a warning to the manufacturers that very quickly, sooner rather than later, you will have to adopt to e-vehicles. And we also need to understand that these e-vehicles are a very important integral component of our smart cities. And that is what this newspaper column talks about. Now let's look at some of the prelims based questions and mains based questions. First, prelims based questions. The school nursery yojana is a scheme to involve school students in raising plant nurseries to bring them closer to natural environment. Second question that I've taken from a previous year's question paper, 2013 prelims. Which of the following terms describes not only the physical space occupied by an organism but also its functional role in the community? Ecological niche. Third, it's a map-based question. The architectural splendor of Hampi is located in which of the river basins? Krishna Tungabhadra basin. Now let's look at mains based questions. Answer should be less than 200 words. Uzbekistan president is on a visit to India, and I've taken a statement from India-Uzbekistan relationship. Uzbekistan is fast getting linked to the global market for production, supplies of raw materials and services. Several excellent opportunities exist for Indian investment in non-ferrous and rare earth metals industry. Comment. And this is an article written on thewire.in, which is a very beautiful website for your civil service examination. Second, we are celebrating the birth anniversary of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, one of the key figures of India's renaissance in the 19th century, the social reformer, the philanthropist, anti-colonial activist. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar made more than one contribution that have made the annals of our history richer. Elaborate. These were some of the prelims and mains based questions. Beyond this, you don't have to read today's newspaper. Yes, there are some facts that have occurred here and there in today's newspaper. For that, please go through our text-based CNA that we have covered, that is available on our website, and that should cover your today's current affairs. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.